Likes roll to move, but hates charts. Lame. So in this video, I'm going to look through some of your comments on my videos and see if I can respond to some of them and give you some of my answers, give you some of my thoughts. So let's have a look at one of these comments. And this is from my video about innovation, which was about how sometimes innovating should not be your key goal. Sometimes it's better to iterate on what's gone before so as not to alienate your audience. Let's have a look at a little clip from that video. I don't believe that being innovative is the key to standing out. It's more important to be distinctive, and this is achieved by having a good idea and executing it well. If you look at a few of the titles which have had great success over recent years, we're talking Wingspan, Everdell, Terraforming Mars, you'll find that none of these games are truly innovative. They all have fun, engaging gameplay, building on well-worn mechanisms without straying too far from that beaten path. Unique experimental design serves to push forward an art form or a craft, but it doesn't always translate to commercial success. If an idea is too out there, it's going to be harder for a user to adopt. So here's the question. Hey Adam, love your channel and this is a really good video, but I think something needs to be added. You're providing accurate, pragmatic advice precisely on how to make what sells, what gets big, and that's certainly useful to designers and publishers. But your focus is so aimed at pleasing audiences, giving people what they already know that they want, that I think it might not take into account the spark that impels a designer to make something idiosyncratic. A vision which prioritizes art over hit potential. A design which will decidedly not be something for everyone, but which will be everything to someone. I mean, firstly, congratulations to whoever wrote that. That's a brilliant little piece of writing there. I love the phrasing and all of that. Very poetic. Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. My whole video there is about how we focus in on something that's going to sell, right? How we focus in on the audience, empathize with them, understand what they want and try and give it to them, okay? With the aim of selling lots of copies and getting lots of people playing our games and really, really enjoying them and loving them, okay? And that approach might well mean that we miss out on something that's just phenomenally inventive and imaginative and exciting for a much smaller niche group of players. And I agree, I didn't really cover that in that particular video, but my excuse for that is that's what everyone's doing, right? That's what the vast majority of designers are doing right now. They're creating these idiosyncratic, odd little pieces of art, expressing themselves, creating the stuff that they want to create with no real expectation about how far it's going to go. A lot of designers are getting to that point where they've made something and then they go, wow, I love this. I want to show it to somebody. I want to get it in front of publishers. I would say that's, I mean, I can't put a figure on it. 90%, maybe more, of designers, that's what they're doing, right? So there's plenty of that idiosyncratic stuff out there already. But I think a lot of those designers are potentially going to get sick of that because they're going to get nowhere. Like a lot of those games are going to be just not marketable enough. They're not going to be, you know, attractive to enough people to get a publisher interested. And so as a result, the designer's going to hit brick wall after brick wall and eventually stop making exciting idiosyncratic stuff that is everything to someone. I think maybe there's a balance. Maybe there's a balance somewhere. You've got to be making stuff that's exciting for sure, but you also need to be making stuff that's attractive to enough people that it warrants being made. Otherwise, you can self-publish, of course, take all the risk on yourself and give it a go. And things like Kickstarter do give you avenues for making small print runs and so on, if people will back you for it. So I'm all in favour of designers doing that. I just don't feel the need to get out there and say it because I really think people need to learn that there's another way, right? And there's nothing wrong with chasing an actual audience and trying to create stuff that's useful and valuable to many people rather than something that's really attractive and exciting to a few. The next question I've got here was about my video Crowdfunding Your Board Game, the pros and cons. Let's have a little clip from that video. You've designed a board game and it's good. It's really good. You've tested it with loads of friends, family and strangers, making tweaks along the way, and now you're pretty sure it's ready to share with the wider world. But you're not really sure what to do next. You're new to all this. But someone makes all these games, right? Each of the hundreds of games released each year has a designer, so why shouldn't your game join the fray? Kickstarter or publisher? That's the question. So here's the comment. Adam, how long can you pull a cat by the balls? It's time to run a Kickstarter and earn 600,000 euros. An example? Flamecraft in 2022. You can create better. Accept this challenge for the next year. You have 12 months. The clock's ticking. Let's imagine what will happen in 2 years. A restaurant, a business meeting, an expensive suit, a Range Rover parked in the parking lot. Everything is in our hands. I mean, I love this guy's enthusiasm, this guy or girl's enthusiasm, right? I love it. They think I can do better than Flamecraft, right? Flamecraft is fantastic. They've got this belief in me. Or maybe they're just a really motivational person. I love it. I just worry a little bit that when people get into this mindset about their own games, that they think that they can create something that's going to change their whole world. That's great. Go for it. Absolutely go for it. But don't put everything else on hold, because the chances are it's not going to happen for the majority of people. You've got to believe in yourself. You've got to believe in your product, but you've also got to be sensible and stable and not risk your money and your family and your life and all the rest of it. You know, you've got to look after yourself at the same time, because we know there are thousands of games out there and there can only be a few Flamecrafts, right? So, I mean, thank you for the motivational words. I can't promise that I'll follow through on it though. I don't really want a restaurant or a Range Rover. And I've got a suit, it's not very expensive. Okay, next up then, there were lots of comments on this video, so I'm sure I'll keep coming if we ever make a video like this again, which I probably will, because I don't have to spend ages scripting it. So if we ever make another video about like this, then I'm sure I'll come back to my video on outdated mechanisms, because that generated more views than any of my other videos ever. And a lot of the comments on it were really quite negative. There were some really positive ones as well, but inevitably you tend to focus on the negative ones. So let's have a look at a selection. In fact, let's have a look at the video first. You don't make calls on a rotary telephone. You don't take road trips in a Ford Cortina, and you don't spend your weekends besting your mates at Pong. Times have moved on. Phones are powerful mini computers in your pocket, cars look like shiny silver bullets, and video game graphics are almost indistinguishable from movies. In the 1960s, the board game Risk was all the rage, innovative, exciting, and very desirable. The perfect family entertainment for a lazy Sunday afternoon. Just as retro video games offer up a dose of nostalgic fun, vintage board games still have something to offer. Nonetheless, like cars, telephones, and video games, tabletop games have matured. They've leveled up. There are a number of features once commonplace which just wouldn't fly in the modern gaming market. And in this video, I'm going to list 10 untouchable mechanisms and features. Designers, do not put this outdated stuff in your games. You want your players to have a good time, right? This video takes forever to start talking about the actual mechanics, like 4 minutes. Like, why are the first words of the video not roll and move? Let's address the first bit. It took about 4 minutes for me to get into the meat of the video. Yeah, I've seen enough comments saying that to think, yeah, it's probably true. I watch it back and I think, do you know, that feels like just a nice little introduction. I feel like I'm setting the scene. Yes, there's an advert in there for my journal, my board game designer journal. You can pick it up on Amazon. I won't advertise it again here. But yeah, there's 4 minutes of stuff before we really get into the mechanisms, but I don't think I entirely sold it as just being about that. It was about how not to design an outdated board game. So it felt like I needed that introduction. That said, I take it on board. I got a lot of comments saying the same thing. This takes forever to get started, and a lot of people probably switched off at that point. So thank you very much. Why are the first words of the video not roll and move? this person's going to be disappointed if they get to the end of the video and see me actually defending roll and move and saying I've specifically left it out of the video because I love roll and move if it's done well. And in fact, I've got a whole other video all about roll and move as a mechanism and how games have used it really effectively. So yeah, sorry, the first words of the video were not roll and move. Next comment, I mentioned this one earlier, likes roll to move, but hates charts, lame. Yeah, I got more comments on this video calling me lame or similar things, or worse things, than I have on any of my other videos. I can accept that a lot of people like charts. We're talking about reference tables here. In that video, I said that maybe, you know, modern board games don't tend to use reference tables. They tend to find clever ways of integrating information into their games. But I can fully accept that there are games where reference tables are really, really valuable. And I think particularly those would be games which require historical accuracy, or perhaps that simulate a particular activity accurately, like a sport or something like that. And you want where accuracy is the key thing, and perhaps accuracy is even more important than fun. So you see this a lot in war games, right? I'm sure war games are really, really fun. I haven't played a lot. I've played miniatures tabletop games where there's a lot of tables, and I think some of that's unnecessary. But if we're going for accuracy, I can see why we want tables, because they can contain a lot of information that you can't fit on a dice or a deck of cards or whatever else. I also get lots of comments about the fact that I sometimes say dice when I mean die, so don't bother to comment on that. I know it's die. Okay, I just sometimes say dice, I don't know why. Reference tables, fine, if you're going for accuracy. Historical accuracy, simulation, fine. I'm not sure it's going to make your game more marketable though, perhaps within that niche, but if you're going for big sales, I think the majority of people, I would guess, don't want to be constantly looking stuff up. Let me give you an example. It's not quite an example of a reference table, but if you think about the game Undaunted Normandy, right? I know there's probably lots of war gamers who'd argue it's not a war game, and it doesn't really matter. It's a game about war. But there's no real reference tables in there, or very, very few. I don't recall any particularly. And even things like when you're taking damage, you're not marking it on a little track, okay? You're removing cards from your deck, or you're mixing in fog of war cards, which make it harder for you to play and take your turns. Everything is fluid. Everything's contained within that deck. That deck is sort of your everything. It's all your options. It's your random card draws. It's your health. It's all of those things at the same time. Super streamlined, and I think a game made 20, 30, 40 years ago would have had reference tables all over the place. I like that idea of trying to bring that stuff that we know works, but bring it in, meld it into what the existing components and make everything more streamlined. Yeah, okay, so I don't hate charts. I do like roll to move though. Love seeing the defensive roll and move. It's bad in plenty of games, but excellent in the ones you mentioned and others I've enjoyed too. It's about execution, not about the mechanism itself being bad. Yeah, absolutely agree. And you can see here the hugely contrasting comments that I got on that video. Some people hated roll and move and were upset I didn't talk about it. Other people saying they were great that I did talk about it in a positive way and didn't include it as a negative thing. Next comment, the worst set of rules I've seen in a modern board game is the except when, making the game so annoyingly complicated that the inventor couldn't play the game according to the rules. Yeah, absolutely agree. And this is something I haven't really covered enough. Maybe it's not big enough to make a whole video about, but that thing about exceptions, it comes up frequently when we're playtesting in our sort of local playtesting group that I've been involved with for the last decade or so. A game will come up with lots of... I'll give you an example of one of my own. So my game Compromat. It's a two-player game about blackjack, lots of special cards in there, special abilities that you can use. But the special abilities all work exactly the same way. They're single use. You use it once and it's spent. Single, once per game abilities. That's it. Now, my co-designer, Rob Fisher, had loads of ideas for fantastic, really clever, different special abilities that worked in all sorts of different ways. Cards that would get sort of shuffled into your existing deck, and ultimately you had to explain the rules for each individual one. Rather than just saying, right, all special ability cards are single use and you can use them at any time, you had to say, but for this one, you use it slightly differently, you mix it into your deck, or this one can only be used at this particular time. And so although I loved those special abilities, and Rob loved those special abilities. It was a case of kill your darlings, right? Strip them out so that we lose the exceptions and we've got one sentence in the rulebook, one thing to teach, and for the vast majority of players there's plenty of variety in there without needing to get into all the convoluted stuff that's clever for us as people who are really, really engaged and familiar with the game, not necessarily so good for newcomers. So exceptions, I totally agree, that is a problem in some modern board games. So the next comment comes from a different video which is called Rule the Game, which is all about writing rules. I'll show you a clip. This is the game Frustration, which is basically Ludo, isn't it, with a Pop-O-Matic in the middle. The rules on the back of the box, so we have on the back of the box here, we've got the rules written as in so many sort of children's games, there's no other rule book. Slam your paddle to shake the dice. If you roll a 6, move one of your men onto your start space. Note whenever you get a 6, slam again. If you don't roll a 6, try again on your next turn. If you have men on the track and you get a 6, you can either put a new man on your start space, move a man that's already out. If you get a 6 and your start space is occupied, and so on. So they keep on going on about rolling a 6. It goes on about if your possible move is to land on one of your own men, stay where you are. When a man has moved all the way around the track, get him home, and so on. At no point in this rules does it say that when you roll that dice, you move as many spaces as it shows on the dice. Okay, it just assumes that you're going to understand that this works like every other roll and move game out there. And I mean, it's not difficult to make that leap, but as a basic sort of principle, it should say there, you roll the dice and you move as many spaces as it shows on the dice, but it's completely neglected from the game. And this is a game that is sold millions of copies. You know, this is not a first edition. This has been around for so many years in mass quantities, and yet the rules are still badly written, which I was just surprised when I came across that. And the comment isn't actually about that, it's about something else. How do you set up values for your first prototype? As in, does a player start with 3 cards or 7 cards? Do we play 5 rounds or 10 rounds? Does something give you 2 or 3 victory points? And the truth is, I don't worry too much about that. This person is specifically asking about the very first prototype, the very first time it gets to the table. I wouldn't worry so much about that. I certainly don't worry about how many rounds we play. We're not going to play it through to completion anyway. So I would just get it on the table and say to the playtesters, I don't know how long. We'll go until it's not fun anymore. Okay, and we'll see how many rounds that feels like. Does something give 2 or 3 victory points? Doesn't really matter. Let's play and see what feels fair. I might even change it midway, cross it out and write a new thing on there. The thing about hand size might make a difference, because if you play with 3 cards or 7 cards, that's going to make a big difference to the feel of the game. And if the game's not flowing well, then you might get the sense that this game isn't fun when it could be, right? So probably I would go with more rather than fewer in that initial playtest. And then if I felt like during that first playtest people felt like they were getting given too many choices and it was slowing the game down, too much decision space, I might reduce it as we play. So I would keep everything very fluid. I wouldn't be in a rush to, nail anything down, right? Keep it really fluid in that initial playtest. That would be my guide. Next video, Inside Secrets of Board Game Design. I think this one I gave a few different examples of just some design ideas, things you could try out. Let's have a look at a clip. A really good piece of advice there is if you do have a massive game, then I think it's always useful to put that game to one side, and it doesn't go anywhere, you've still got it, but start thinking about what would a junior version of that game be? What would the kids version of that game be? Like you've got Monopoly, you've got Junior Monopoly, you've got Cluedo, Junior Cluedo. On my shelves I've got Agricola, I've got Agricola Family Edition. Okay, there's Concept Kids, you've got Scythe, and then My Little Scythe. Okay, so what would your board game be if it was my little version of your board game? What would it be if it was made for children? And what you find out by doing that is what's important in your game and what are the barriers to entry to your game. What are the things that are making it complicated? What really matters in your game? And actually, the games are far more complex. Your game is probably 10 times more complex than you think it is, because in your head you've got everything worked out and it seems simple. It very rarely seems that simple to somebody else. So the comment is, Adam talking about big games being bad makes sense as he's a small game guy. apparently. But there are people who love those insane 8-hour space games. What do you think is the biggest scope you would allow a new designer to do if you were their tutor? Totally theoretical situation. I thought that was a great question, right? Because I'm not anybody's tutor. People can do what they like. People can completely ignore my advice. It's on YouTube. Don't watch it, or watch it and then ignore it. That's fine. I'm not your tutor. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to tell you what is the biggest game that you can make. That said, when I started out designing games, I think I was designing games that were on a par with stuff like Carcassonne, right? Or Ticket to Ride. Pretty simple, accessible games. And I struggled even with those to get the balancing right, the scoring right, to keep it accessible, to keep it flowing. I would have really, really struggled to make anything more complex than that. Now, I'm not everybody. There will be people who are much more talented than me, who have jobs where they are really involved with intricacies of balancing figures and interwoven systems and so on, where it will come much more naturally to them than it would to somebody like me. So I don't think you can put an absolute arbitrary, this is how far you go with it, but I would say starting smaller and building up probably makes sense, so that you're not wasting an enormous amount of time, and that's both your time and your playtesters' time, creating something huge that you're going to really struggle to unpick. So I would start small, and I think the advice I gave in that video was to create a junior version of your massive epic game and see how that feels, right? You can always come back to the massive epic one later. So yeah, that's my thoughts about that one. Next question, designing board games which break the rules. So this was a recent video I made about taboos in board games. I'll show you a quick clip. The year was 1966. Johnny Carson was bringing in an average of 12 million viewers for his late night talk show. And on the 3rd of May, Carson's guest on The Tonight Show was Eva Gabor, star of popular American sitcom Green Acres. This edition, one of 4,500 with Carson as host, was memorable for one particular segment. Carson, Gabor, and the entire studio audience falling about laughing as they played a board game. The game was Twister, and the image of the beautiful Gabor in full evening attire contorting herself around the popular TV host caught the attention of the millions watching. Even at the peak of the swinging 60s, conservative values from earlier decades lingered. Glamorous television stars didn't usually cavort with each other on mainstream TV. It just wasn't the done thing. But far from complaining, the viewers flocked to toy stores to buy their own copies of the game. The day after the show aired, New York's FAO Schwartz reported a deluge of customers at their famous store. Other TV shows ran similar promotional spots, and publisher Milton Bradley started running newspaper ads for the sensational new party game seen by millions on TV. Twister's critics labelled the game disparagingly as sex in a box, an unofficial tagline which only worked in the game's favour, as Twister became the party game of the 60s, a staple at college parties and kids' parties alike. 12 months later, Milton Bradley had sold over 3 million copies, and 50 years on, Twister has sold many, many more millions than that. The game was developed from a very simple premise. Designers Rubens, Foley and Gaia set about creating a game where the players constitute the game pieces. One of the best hooks in the history of the industry. And here's the comment. Hi Adam, I've just discovered your channel and I'm loving everything so far. I've self-published my first game called Happy Ending, an erotic themed game for adults. And I'm really happy to hear that it fits what you were saying about people looking for games as reasons to do things outside the norm. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, so I'm not going to make any further comment on that one. But I will say, hopefully I'll be able to make another video like this in the future and we can look at some other comments. I hope you found it interesting, I hope you found it enjoyable, and I'll see you on the next video. All the best.